anticipation has only made me love him more. How about it for the great John Rothman, everyone? John Rothman.
Yeah.
Yes. Look at you, you sexy devil. John.
Well, all I can tell you is after Kim's acorn story and the LeBron James jersey. By the way, I do this complimentary. I do this because Mark and Kim are such great people. I don't charge. But if you wanted to buy the jersey and give it to me for my son Joel, he'd be thrilled.
Oh my God! Well, I do want to. I just don't have the money to. So
$3 million.
Yeah,
it's the tax savings from working with Steve Moskowitz.
That's it. Moskowitz might be able to ninja it somehow, but Rothman, what did you make of the State of the Union? Do you want to let me get a couple of general Rothman comments, Albert, and then we can play a couple of clips? Is that cool?
Yeah, sounds good.
I thought Joe Biden hit a home run. I thought he was effective. He was powerful. What was great is he could go off script and still have that repartee with the Republicans. I thought the fact that at the very beginning, he was able to get an ovation complimenting Speaker McCarthy, while at the same time talking about his own activities. I mean, I got to tell you honestly, he could not have gone better for the president. I'll tell you what I really watched last night, though. I watched Speaker McCarthy. I was looking at his face the whole time, and you could see how uncomfortable he was. And you even saw him do something that was amazing. He went, shh, to the Republicans. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed to me that Joe Biden scored and scored big. And if he decides to run for re-election, if that's the decision, and I think it will be, he's going to be a formidable candidate.
It's interesting that you talk about that shush moment, because prior to the State of the Union message, as you know, McCarthy was on record as saying we're not going to have the same sort of, demonstrations of anger or just, these outward, we'd call it heckling, really, if it were a club.
You can see what control he has over his Republicans, which is why it took him so long to get elected speaker.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And, John, it is a new day. I was saying, in the new America, which celebrates sort of smack talk and Instagram moments and owning the other person in some back and forth. I feel like the days of real decorum around the State of the Union message, they may be gone.
I think it depends on the president. It depends on who is in charge. But I can tell you that it's very clear that Speaker McCarthy does not control his members. And I thought the fact that you had the kind of hooting and booing and all the rest. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was interviewed this morning on CNN, I believe. And I was amazed that not only was she not apologetic, she was proud of her activity.
That's what I mean. Yeah. It's all about owning the other. She had her moment. She got her cutaway. How many other members of the House get that cutaway, get the anticipation cutaway, then the payoff cutaway? I mean, it's about media time, John. It strikes me that it's just
no question about it.
Yeah.
So, in short, I think Joe Biden did very well. I think the Republicans failed. And a quick comment about Sarah Huckabee Sanders. It was a canned speech. There is no real response to the president when you have a speech pre-written. I thought there was nothing that was particularly interesting or edifying about it. She was talking to her base. She was not talking to the American people. And one thing we should really rethink is the response, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, because when the Democrats have been in that position, they've had an equally tough time. I was an old debater, and I can tell you we would have taken notes on what was said, hit the 10 key points, and responded, which should be an easy thing for a member of Congress to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. By the way, edifying is a dang word, please.
Was Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her whole normal or crazy thing, do you think she's setting the stage maybe for a presidential run?
I think she's setting the stage to be Donald Trump's running mate in 2024, were he to be the Republican nominee for president. She certainly has a future. Let me remind you that her father served 10 years as governor of Arkansas. And although we used to dismiss Arkansas really as a major force, I want to remind you, Bill Clinton came from Arkansas.
Yeah, I don't want to dismiss Arkansas, but man, Mike Huckabee is a despicable guy. And that, I'm sorry. And Sarah Huckabee, who carried that water for Donald Trump during that administration, during a time that they completely discontinued the White House briefings, I'll remind you. She comes from despicable, and I think the apple really does not fall far from the tree. Now, I agree with you. That was and I love that Kim asked that question about president, because it felt like a presidential type speech.
Yeah.
And Rothmann is essentially saying just that, which is that, she's underscoring the kind of Trumpian messages, the us versus them messages, the wokeness she talked about, even though that Biden didn't mention wokeness, and nor was there even a woke moment in the entire speech.
And did you notice her subtle, or maybe not so subtle, dig at Ron DeSantis? She talked about the fact that she is today unrolling a massive educational reform. Well, who is the Republican potential candidate for president who is touting his educational reform on so many levels? DeSantis. So if I were Donald Trump, I would have been very happy with the fact that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was sort of sticking to Ron DeSantis.
Just because you've mentioned DeSantis, I'll just touch on this. Donald Trump can own DeSantis. DeSantis can't go low enough to really go after Trump. Trump will stop at nothing. Trump.
Yeah, well, you heard what I don't mean to interrupt you, but you heard that Donald Trump attacked Ron DeSantis because I guess he was a teacher at some point, and there was a beer party or something. Yes. And all I can tell you is Donald Trump is as despicable as they come. Yeah. And may I say, birds of a feather, regrettably.
What John's talking about is that Trump claimed that he was grooming by using alcohol, grooming young people. Isn't that's exactly what
young women, and he was very specific about that. So look,
the pot calling the kettle black.
Well,
let's give me a little bit. Albert, what do you have queued up? What do you like of our last night? Here we go. A little from the
nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster in the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. So some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are.
Stop for a second.
Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share,
I just want to quickly note, that was very important what he said about the last administration and the debt ceiling. It might have been a taste subtle for a lot of the crowd. That's sort of I mean, obviously it hits squarely, I think, those of us watching, but he's about to set up a much bigger moment. But John, it's interesting, and you as someone who can craft speeches and craft words, you have to strike the balance between making a point and not being too over the top by hitting us over the head with it. He didn't mention Trump. He mentioned the last administration. And he didn't mention a Democratic Congress. He just mentioned they did the right thing. I wonder if you could speak to that moment, because it was a moment that's kind of lost in the other moments.
It was very important. And while Albert, thank you very much. By the way, he called me last night to confirm everything.
Albert, thank you.
You're welcome. Went in the middle of the response by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, so his timing couldn't have been better. Let me just indicate to you what the president did was to juxtapose himself and what Donald Trump did. He did not mention Donald Trump's name, which was just fine. I don't think he needed to do that. But you'll notice the Republican response. And it's true. When Donald Trump increased the debt, the Republicans didn't scream. By the way, they didn't scream when George W. Bush increased the national debt. But it becomes an episodic moment when you are the minority or the majority to turn the tables. And that's what you saw last night. So I give Joe Biden high marks for the way he delivered the address. I've known Joe Biden for 30 years. Actually longer, I hate to admit it. I first met him in the 1970s, right after he was elected to the Senate. And I used to watch him at presentations, and he was brilliant, powerful, compelling. And that's what he was last night.
He did have energy. Yeah, he did have energy.
Best presentation by Joe Biden since his election as president.
Juxtaposes a ding word. Sorry, go ahead, Kim. Yeah.
People are talking about how, well, Joe Biden is an everyman, and seeming surprised that he came out, as not one of the elite. But we've kind of known that about him for a long time. This is a guy who's, rode the train home every night after he was finished with his work in the Senate. So why do you think people are surprised to learn that he's kind of for the middle class?
All right. First, quick story. I really first met Joe Biden face to face when Tom Lantos, the late congressman, was on his staff. When I was in Washington, I would stop by to see Tom, who was working in Joe Biden's office. And I would come in and Joe Biden would be there and we'd have a lovely chat. And then he would excuse himself to get on that train to go home to his kids. I have never forgotten that, ever. But I think there is a key element which everyone needs to understand. Joe Biden is a professional. He's been around the track with ups and downs since his election to the Senate. And he was elected in 1972 and came into office in 73 in January. This is a man with vast experience. And a lot of what he does is based on instinct. Why does he reach out to the Republicans? Because that was what he did in the United States Senate year after year after year with people like Jesse Helms. People who were, I think, terrible in many ways, but he reached out to them and worked with them. And that to me is the essence of him. And I thought he was very cute when he turned around at the very beginning and shook Speaker McCarthy's hand and said, "I hope this doesn't do you any damage." I mean, it was the kind of spirit that I expect. Now, why do people downgrade him? To answer you directly, I suffer from low blood pressure, so I watch Fox.
Yeah,
and I immediately become stimulated. In fact, before I came on with you, I turned on Fox just to make sure I was up for it this morning. But you will note what they do on Fox routinely is to slam the president. And yes, Kamala Harris. We've talked about that before. Mm-hmm. It is an unrelenting blast with no attempt for civility or for honesty or for integrity. And that's why I do not use the term Fox and news in the same paragraph. It's an oxymoron.
Right, I get it. And I want to play the rest of this clip. Look, I thought Biden had a great night, but I think there's a little bit of a, this I Love Biden parade going on here. And as I say, I think he had a good night. And I think, I would vote for him again, given the GOP alternative. And people talk about, well, I'm not going to vote for an 81-year-old. I vote for an 85-year-old over the alternative. The GOP, I think, is a poisonous party right now. I don't know. The only big legislation they got through was a major tax cut, and that's all they care about is big business. They don't care about poisoning the environment. They don't care about people who need a leg up. These programs that have worked to have a successful track record of working in America, they would just as soon crush all of them. But be that as it may, Joe Biden is an institutional Democrat, okay? So let's not pretend that he's some lefty. He can be accused of being a lefty. He can be accused of being woke and all these other things that they do on Fox News now. But when you really look at what he does reach across the aisle to Jesse Helms. I don't know if that's something I'd brag about. I mean, there is but then you do have to roll around with a lot of people who are pretty awful in Washington to get stuff done. So I'm of divided mind on that. But just on the Joe Biden thing, I mentioned at the top of the show, and I'll say it now here again. He told the populist message that will cut through. The Democrats, I don't believe that they message as well as the Republicans. And the Republican messaging is all about fiction, but still they message it and say it enough, and it starts to become something so much a part of the narrative that the press asked them about it. He really did get a solid message out, and it was populist last night, John, as I was mentioning at the top of the show. All the things that happened, all the ways down to resort fees. I mean, I was really impressed with him last night in his messaging.
And of course, remember, he kept calling himself a capitalist. And the reason he called himself a capitalist is because the Democrats keep calling him a socialist. I mean, the Republicans keep calling him a socialist.
Right.
So it depends who you listen to, Mark. If you listen to Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and Laura Ingraham, you get one slant. And if you really listen carefully and you understand the politics of it, you understand the paradox of a negative rating. Same thing applies with Kamala Harris. If you are pummeled and blasted by a network that is predisposed to doing that, and you know that more than half of the American people watch Fox for news, then you understand the problem. We could talk about Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity, and they're absolutely disgraceful responses to the State of the Union. But I've come to accept it. And the good news, I think, is the American people understand it. And that's why Joe Biden is doing as well as he is. One last point. I know we're running low on time, although I've got plenty of time this morning. I don't start teaching till 1 o'clock. I want to be crystal clear.
You're always teaching, John Rothman. Let me say that. Go ahead, John. Hallelujah.
Biden is going to announce that he is running. But every Democrat in the back of their mind is going to think, but what if something happens between now and the Democratic convention? And so you have the Kamala Harrises, you have the Gavin Newsoms, you have Amy Klobuchar, who all of a sudden is being touted again. You have a series of people within the Democratic Party, Mayor Pete for sure, all sitting back and waiting to see what happens. But in the meantime, they will all support actively Joe Biden as long as Joe Biden chooses to run.
Who has less of a chance of winning, John, if Joe Biden was out of the picture? Who has less of a chance of winning, Kamala Harris or Mayor Pete?
Mayor Pete. Let me explain something. A lot of people downgrade Kamala. The first talk show she ever appeared on was on mine. I have known her for years. She is very effective in a certain way. No vice president, we've talked about this before, can really emerge from the shadow. What I think is very interesting is the Black community is solidly behind Kamala Harris. They will have a decisive impact on who the Democratic nominee is. Notice the Democrats have moved up the primary to South Carolina. Well, let me tell you, her old sorority is based in South Carolina. And if Kamala Harris is either president or a candidate for president, she will have substantial support.
I think you make such a good point about the moving up of that of the primary calendar. That I think that's a legitimate, relevant point when it comes to Kamala Harris's political future. As you know, I don't feel as though she is a national candidate with any real chance, but you and I can go round and round about that, and we will. I'm looking forward to going round and round in the months to come.
You remember when they called Harry Truman the senator from Pendergast? Do you remember the old expression, to err is Truman? I'm only pointing out that once a person is either the nominee or is president of the United States, all of a sudden, everything changes. And I think the sniping at her right now is inordinately inappropriate. As I felt the same way about the sniping at Dan Quayle, who was a very bright fellow and really got slammed by the media. I used to write, by the way, for the Quayle Quarterly. When he left the vice presidency, I was heartsick because I didn't have that for him. But I can tell you that don't count her out. Don't count Gavin Newsom out. Don't by any means count Amy Klobuchar out. Don't count Mayor Pete, or I should say Secretary Pete, out. All these people have presidential aspirations. And so we have to wait and see how it moves. The other person I would watch, and you're going to think I'm crazy for saying this, is Hakeem Jeffries. And I would also watch Cory Booker. I can tell you that if anything were to happen and the Democratic race were open, for sure Cory Booker would run. And remember, he has had the experience of running once before. These candidates don't write books just for fun. They write books because they want to introduce themselves to people. And, you know, one of my hobbies is collecting those books that come out by either presumptive presidential candidates or presidential candidates. I have shelves of books signed by people who never made it. But you never know when lightning may strike. Or the
I would love to.
I'd make it deposited.
I'd love to see Yeah, there are more acorns or more books in Rothmann's library from that would be a good side bet. I would love a President Cory Booker. Would love it. Again, don't see it happening, but I would love to see it.
I just mention one thing locally. Some of you remember Willie Brown, who was mayor of San Francisco.
Right.
His daughter, Sydney Brown, who is brilliant and who is about to go to law school, had the pleasure of introducing Cory Booker as the next president of the United States. This was back when Cory was running. And I can tell you we have a lot of local ties into Cory Booker, and Sydney Brown being for him is a big plus.
Very, very cool. That I didn't know that, and that's awesome. As usual, I've learned something. You can find him here generally on Wednesdays when we can corral him. Great takes, John. We didn't even get to a lot of things. We'll put some stuff off to the side and get to it next time.
Well, and please do give your father my warmest good wishes, and to your mother as well. All of you should read the magnificent book.
My dad's a constitutional scholar, and right now he's having a rough go of it. Thank you, John. I got to wrap up, but thank you, Mark. I do appreciate a reference to my dad. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.